Hi, I'm going to use a series of slides to show you how to make a vase form from slabs. And the first thing that I find really useful when I'm using this technique is to make a template or pattern. And for that, I'll try and find some stiffish paper, something like an old poster or something that has some stock to it. Not as thick as cardboard, but somewhere thicker than newsprint. I start by drawing a baseline parallel to the edge of the paper, or maybe right at the edge of the paper, and then I will mark the center of that and then determine how far out from that is going to be the opening at the top and the foot at the bottom. With a center line established, I can fold the paper in half along that seam and then trace the profile of the pot. And I want to err on the side of generosity, because when you stretch these slabs out, you're going to lose some of the diameter. It's going to be reduced as you bend the slabs. And so you want to sort of anticipate that by adding probably about an inch on either side of it, depending on how much you plan on bending it. With the template made, it's time to get busy preparing the clay. And so I like to pound my clay out by hand as much as possible. I might finish it off with a rolling pin, but I really want to compress the clay by pounding on it with my fists. And then I know approximately how big it is because I have that template to refer to. I can lay the template on there and I can see where if not, I need to pound it out a little bit more. And my idea is to sort of pound it out to the shape of one side, but have the thing be thick enough so that when I roll it out, ideally I can get both of my halves out of it. And in a perfect world, that's what happens, but it's not a perfect world. So it may be easier for you to roll one slab at a time. Again, you've got the template, so they're going to match up and be the same. With the slab cut out, or with the slab rolled out, I cut it out right away, but I don't cut the bottom just yet. The next step is for me to start thinking about letting these slabs set up a bit. They're too floppy and wet for me to work with, and I might as well start bending them. So I'll look for something that I can drape them over, maybe a cardboard tube or some crushed up newspaper, anything to just kind of raise them up a little bit so air can get underneath them and they can start to have a memory of being bent. Timing really is everything in ceramics, and you can't rush these things. Right now they're soft and floppy, and so you got to let them just set up. You can accelerate that process with a fan or maybe some gentle blowing with a hairdryer, but it's easier to just do something else while they set up. And just how long that's going to take is hard for me to tell you. It's going to depend on how warm it is or whether you've done anything to accelerate the process. So you just have to keep checking them. What you're looking for is what I would call soft leather hard. They're stiff enough to stand up on their own, but they're still pretty soft and pliable. So now we can start to prepare them to be joined together. And I find the easiest thing for me to do to cut the beveled edge that I need is to lay the slab back down on the table and to cut using the table as support at an angle there to cut away that bit of clay. So once I've got all four of those beveled edges cut, then I should be able to put these together. Except that something's not quite right, because I forgot to mention what I call the poofing of the slab, which is where I try to bend that edge of the slab to meet the table so that becomes sort of the dividing line between the two halves. I know I have a flat surface of a table, and if I can bring those lips of what was the bent slab, that sort of potato chip, if I can bring all those edges down to meet the slab by gently sort of pushing down from where it's touching, I should then have two halves that are going to go together. This can take a little while you move up and down and sort of work it against the table. And I like to get both sides poofed and ready to join before I go any further. When I think I'm close, I'll go ahead and pick them back up again and see how they're fitting together. And this is a chance for me to see how they line up really, and if I need to make any adjustments, if I need to cut away any clay or add any. So now I'm ready to prepare the slabs to be joined together, and I like to lay the poof side, the softer side, against something that with some give. So that might be an old t-shirt or some bubble wrap, or in this case some foam. So for a big job like this, I use a fork rather than a serrated rib. But whatever you use, you want to be aggressive about your scoring. And we're not just cutting the beveled edge, we're also cutting an inch back or so from that edge, because we're going to be putting a coil in there to reinforce things. As soon as I get that scored up, I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush and water and paint some water into the scored lines. You do want to pay attention not to let the water pool into the basin of that form. So if the water runs out of your score lines into the slab, go ahead and get a sponge. Don't let it sit there, because that can cause weakening and cracking later on. This is a good time to get your coils that you're going to use to reinforce the joints together. Go ahead and roll them out and give them a score. I want to remind you that the place for the coils to be attached is not on the edge, not the beveled edge that you cut, but just back from that edge. The idea is that those two beveled edges are going to join right together, and this coil is going to be behind that, and we're going to blend it across that joint. For this half of the vase, I have easy access, and I might as well take advantage of it and blend that coil really well into this side. This is kind of the place you want to be. The other half is not getting a coil, but we still want to score back from the edge, because that coil that we've attached on the other side is going to get blended into it. So same thing. When you paint the water on, don't let it pool. If it does, get a sponge and mop it up. Don't let a puddle of water sit on a flat surface of clay. Now use the time while the water is soaking into the edges of the scored edges of side 2 to come back and score the coil that you've just added to side 1. This is what it should look like. It should be really roughed up and ready to be joined. So I like to paint slip on just one of the faces. So I painted on the edge that doesn't have the coil. With the edges so well prepared, I'm confident that this thing is going to go together and hold together, and I begin that process by just lining up the bottom corners. And then I just close it up from the bottom up, just zipping it up. With the two sides stuck together, now I can start using that coil and blending it across, and I'll start by tacking it on the bottom and then flip it over and blend it across the top where it's easy for me to reach. And then I go back and forth blending the top and the bottom coils across that seam as far as my hands can comfortably reach. If I can't reach the whole seam with my hands, then I have to use a tool. So that's an encouragement for thinking about having a generous enough mouth that you can reach in the whole way. In this example, it was easier for me to get to most of the form from the bottom than the top. Again, something to think about. Now with the coil blended across, I'm pretty confident the thing is stuck together, and I can start getting aggressive smoothing the outside with a rubber rib. It also doesn't hurt to hit it with a stick. And once I feel like I've altered the form as much as I'm going to in terms of rounding with the paddle and the rib, and I know that that's going to be the bottom diameter, now it's time for me to attach the bottom, and I'll just take that whole pot and set it on a scrap slab. Hopefully there was something left over from when I cut the thing out to begin with. If not, roll another slab. And it's not required. You could use a lap joint, but a bevel joint is going to be stronger. And as always, I'm going to recommend that you score aggressively and follow the normal procedure of scoring, painting water in, letting the water soak, maybe rescoring and adding a little slip before attaching. With the slab in place, I'll go around with my fingers and sort of pinch that joint together from the outside first. And to really make sure that those two edges joint mesh together, those scar marks interlock, I'll come around with a paddle and compress that whole edge. So when I flip it back over, I'll usually plop it a little bit, and that between the paddling and the plopping, it's probably caused the bottom of the pot to bell out a little bit. So I'm going to come in now with a fettling knife or some other kind of tool to remove some of that material, just sort of eyeballing, kind of following the contour of the pot. Now finally I can just spend some time smoothing it and refining the form till I get it to a point that I think it is done. Once I have my refined form established, I can start thinking about whether I want to draw onto it or carve onto it or add things onto it or carve things out of it. The real play begins. So have fun. Make some slab pots.